Good evening, everybody. We are so glad that you are here with us tonight. My name is Beth Ann Dorman. I'm the president and CEO at For All Seasons, and we are so excited to welcome you here to our 8th annual No Matter What You Matter event. We started this speaker series several years ago as a way to bring education and awareness to the community. And I am so incredibly blessed to have members of our board of directors here, some of our community partners and our sponsors. And so if you're a board member or if you're a sponsor of tonight's event or a partner of the agency, would you please just give a wave and so that we can acknowledge all of you that are here tonight. Our goal tonight is to really help folks understand about suicide prevention and really start a conversation in our community. You know, we do this each year in the month of September, but really we know that suicide prevention is a 12-month effort. And this week's series that we are kicking off is Be a Lifeline. Because we know that in the topic of suicide, I was just talking with our presenter, Jeff, that this is not an easy topic. And so we know that folks are not sometimes sure how to start the conversation. Or sometimes you might be a parent or a teacher or a concerned community member, and you're not quite sure where to begin. And so we hope that tonight gives you an opportunity to begin in a way that we can all be a part of suicide awareness and prevention together. We started our No Matter What You Matter campaign 8 years ago after a wonderful gift that was provided to our community through the Dock Street Foundation. Richard Marks and Amy Haynes sent about 50 of us to New York City to see the musical Dear Evan Hansen. And for those of you who are not familiar with the musical, it tells the story of a teenage young boy who commits suicide. And it really walks you through how that suicide impacts the family, the school system, the friends, the people that were not friends with him. And on the ride back, I called Richard and I said, hey, I just want you to know we're going to do something with this gift that you've given us to be in the city for the day. And that's really where No Matter What You Matter was born. Because we know that what's most important when we think about suicide and what's most important when we think about the prevention and the way to start the conversation is that we want folks to know that it's okay not to be okay. And that no matter what you bring to the table without judgment, we have services in our community to help and assist and to close the gap. And when we think about those services, we know that time after time, we live in a world where mental health services and the needs are continuing to increase. And so we're really proud of the services that For All Seasons have worked so hard to shift our way of doing business and be able to share with the community continually that for the last 18 months, we are using an open access program. That means that you get to walk through our doors 5 days a week or hop on a telehealth session 5 days a week and come in for services. Your mental health assessment is completed in that time frame. You're assigned your clinician that day, and within 5 days, if you need psychiatry, then you're with that person. And that's so different from the way that mental health services have operated in the past. No longer are we saying to folks, hey, we can help you, but give us 12 to 18 months to get you in. And that's really the impetus for what has to happen in our community around suicide prevention. We know that when a crisis is happening, the crisis needs a response in that moment. And so we're really grateful to be able to bring to you an expert tonight. Each year we bring someone in who's able to help us have a conversation in a different way, or be able to reiterate and revisit conversations that we've had in the past. Lisa Mulcahy, I'm sorry, she is now Lisa Mulcahy, and I had the great pleasure of being in a training with Jeff Thompson. Jeff is a retired NYPD detective. He is a professor at Columbia University and does an amazing amount of work across not only our region, but across the country as it comes to suicide prevention. Jeff has not only become a friend, he's become somebody that you can have a serious conversation with. He becomes somebody that I cut up with more than I have serious conversations with, because we know these topics are hard and heavy. And so Jeff is here tonight as a gift to the community to be able to really talk through suicide prevention, being a lifeline to people, And we're really in a great position to be able to introduce Jeff to you now, and he'll be back in our community in the beginning of October to be working on a new initiative that For All Seasons is a part of called Talbot First. And we're working on this initiative to bring mental health services and embed them into all of our first responder communities across the shore. And so for the last year and a half, Lisa and I have been working with all of our branches of first responders, and Jeff will be coming to do that training for this group where we are going to be able to ensure that our first responder community, our veterans community, they really have those lifelines that they need in that moment. And so I'm grateful that you're here tonight in person. I'm grateful for those of you that are on Facebook Live with us. We're going to have Jeff come up. He and I will do a Q&A afterwards, and then we'll open up questions for those of you here as well as online. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to Jeff Thompson.
Okay, good evening, everybody. How are you? Thank you. And I'll just reiterate a couple things that Beth Ann said as well. Thank you so much for being here. And we were talking about the audience that was here, and thank you to the virtual audience for being here as well. It's a tough topic. And I know we always wonder, will people actually show up? So again, thank you for being here. And Beth Ann, thank you, Lisa as well, and your entire staff and board. If we can, let's just hear another round of applause for them. So what I'm here to do is tell you a bit about myself, a bit of my life journey, and intertwine it with the work that I've done and my life experiences. And ultimately, I'm just Jeff standing up here. I've accumulated some titles in the front of my name, on the back of my name, but ultimately, as you hear, what I'll share with you all is the commonality of all of us, whether you're first responders, healthcare workers, or whatever else you do in your profession. First and foremost, it comes back to who we are as human beings and the common humanity that we have. And with this month being Suicide Prevention Month, and also yesterday being World Suicide Prevention Day, I also, given my background, as Beth Ann said, and I'll share a bit more with you, I have to also just give acknowledgement to what today is, September 11th, and especially being a New Yorker, NYPD, and for having family worked in FDNY and having lost loved ones on that day and afterwards to sickness and strangers that I never got a chance to meet. If it's all right with everybody, let's just take a quick moment of silence, please. Thank you. So we come back to the topic at hand, and by the way, you're going to see me do some hand gestures. It's not me dancing as much as Beth Ann asked me to dance tonight. That's not happening. When I do like a hand gesture like this, or maybe like this, the slides will change. It's a very elaborate technical setup here, so if I do it more than twice, there might be a technical issue, but there we go. Thank you very much. Otherwise, they can mess with me down there. By the way, the other thing I'm going to say is sometimes I say things and people laugh. And I'm either laughing with me or at me, and this is a very heavy topic. And Beth Ann, you said that a couple of times, but it's also, we have to really, the work that I'm involved in is really, really heavy stuff, too. And I try to practice everything I preach, because otherwise I'd be some fool up here saying do this and not doing it myself, where I talk about the work. I worked in the NYPD for 20 years and 9 months. I had a variety of roles. I walked the beat, patrol, worked in specialized units. I was a hostage negotiator. I helped teach and train it. And I started to realize something as I got further into my career. First, and I'm not here to stand up, defend, or speak for anyone, but from my experiences, especially police and the NYPD, we're good at what we do. We're really, really good at what we do, especially helping people in the worst moments of their lives. As good as I thought we were at that, I started realizing something. As good as we're helping strangers, the adverse was true. We weren't very good at looking after ourselves or each other. So the last 6 years of my career, I turned mainly inward facing. I became their first ever mental health and wellness coordinator. With great other members, uniform and civilian, we dedicated a lot of our work looking after the well-being of the people that look after the well-being of others. And regardless of whether I'm helping police, first responders, military, anyone, it's really from three levels here, if you look at what's on proactive. And again, as I say this out loud, please don't look at this as a presentation. This is for you sitting here. It's for you sitting up there watching live, and if you watch this recording. Ask yourself, what are you doing on a daily basis? to look after yourself and your well-being. Because if we're going to talk about suicide prevention, it's not just prevention, it's the proactive aspects. So on a daily basis, how do you take care of yourself? And I'll just point a note out on that. Sometimes when I give presentations like this, and sometimes to younger audience as well, they're like, Jeff, I get it, I'm good. I'm good. I don't need this, but I know how other people might need it. And I'll remind them, and especially anybody in the audience, if you work out, right, physical workout, and I'm not going to try and make it awkward and call on somebody right now. I can't really see you anyway with the bright lights. But imagine some of you raised your hand and you said, yeah, Jeff, I work out. And then I would usually ask, okay, so how many days a week? And just say somebody in there, 6 daing a week. And I would ask them, I go, oh, and without trying to make it weird, I'd say, oh, do you feel like you're in good shape? And they're like, yeah, not bad. I'd say, oh, so you stopped working out? And they're like, huh? I'd say, that's stupid, isn't it? And then I said, don't say that, I'll say it. I'd say, it's absurd. You keep working out to stay in shape. It should be no different for your mental health. So just because you're in a good spot right now, that is awesome, that's great. But you gotta know what you're doing. You gotta know what you're doing so you can keep doing it. Why? Because you gotta prepare in the situations if you fall into a personal crisis. And that's part of the human condition. Things happen. Bad things happen. We all will die at some point in our lives, so we can't escape that. So we practice the proactive to help prepare us for crisis moments, because if you don't prepare on a daily and an ongoing basis, when you fall into a crisis, what do you have to fall back on? Then my other work is involved in suicide, which is the main topic that we're here to talk about today. And suicide, I think most people are familiar with the term suicide prevention. There's another term called suicide postvention. That means, unfortunately, somebody already died by suicide. And what I'm involved in is something called the psychological autopsy. I helped create a protocol where we investigate suicide. And when we investigate suicide, when we conduct these investigations, we got to generally answer 4 questions. 1, why did the person die by suicide? 2, why by those means? 3, think about this. Why that day? If somebody's been in a bad spot for days, weeks, months, years, what happened that day that made them take their life? And then number 4, why didn't the protective factors counter their thoughts and unfortunate actions of suicide? Protective factors are the good things going on in someone's life. And that ties right back in up to the top. Now, one of the ways we collect, first let me take a step back. I do it primarily with first responders, these psychological autopsies, these suicide investigations. And I always say for 2 reasons. 1, first and foremost, we owe it to that fallen brother or sister to find out what happened to them. They dedicated their life to helping and saving others, what happened in their life. But then 2, when we do it, unfortunately, with multiple incidents, that gives us science and data. It helps us better understand suicide. Why? To help us with these other 2 levels. Our proactive outreach and trying to support people in crisis. And for first responders, one bit of information from the data that comes out, what usually is a protective factor, meaning something good in somebody's life, wanting really enjoying their work and their role as a policeman, fire, EMS, becomes something bad in the sense that it becomes their sole identity, which is very, very unhealthy. And I consider myself, first and foremost, a very fortunate person for many things. I got to be able to call myself an NYPD detective. But I had to remind myself, and this isn't to diminish my work or anyone else's work, regardless of what you do, but you've got to remind yourself, it's just a job. It's just a job. And even right now, wherever you are, think about the other titles that I would hope are more important than whatever your job title is. And for someone like me up here, father, husband, son, brother, neighbor, friend, those trump those. And sometimes we've got to reevaluate things, or maybe even ask ourselves, are we practicing what we preach up here? And that's why I always consider it a privilege to get an opportunity to stand up here and make sure, hey, Jeff, make sure you're practicing what you preach. And there's never a perfect balance either, and we've got to be realistic with things. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. And there'll be time afterwards for questions and comments, so please. So just a quick example of that. So I loved working in the NYPD and trying to practice what I just said I preached. I took a great big pill called humility. I realized I'm not that important. It doesn't diminish the work that I was doing that I thought was very important with really important people and having great results, but I also realized at a certain point enough's got to be enough. So I decided after 20 years to retire, because if there's one thing I learned, especially in my police work and my crisis counseling and outreach work, life is really precious. Life is very, very precious. And there was a lot more I wanted to do in life. Some of the stuff that I was doing as side work in the NYPD, and then my work within the NYPD, I wanted to do on a just much wider scale. And for example, does anybody like traveling? Yeah, I like traveling, especially when other people pay for it. Thank you. Thank you for all seasons again. I wasn't required to say that. But that was part of the idea. What the hell was I waiting for? That's the thing. If there's a takeaway any of you get, and I hope you get a few, let this be one of them. Stop waiting. Stop waiting for the perfect day to look after yourself. Stop waiting for the right time to check in on somebody, a loved one, a coworker, a neighbor. Do it. Because if there's one thing I learned, what does it look like suffering in people? Sometimes it's the toughest person in the room. And that's where with my work for first responders, too, sometimes what makes us really good at that kind of work, unfortunately works to our detriment too, because people can't see, and we put up really good walls. So this is just a snapshot of some police agencies I've worked with in the past maybe year or so. We could go to the next slide. I also realized how precious life is, and there was a lot more I wanted to do. And there's no other way for me to say this other than, that's not me, in case you were wondering. No, it's not going to be me. Now, I said I was going to be really careful with my word choice, so I have to reframe how I usually say this. I just wanted to do more cool stuff in life. I love doing research. I'll forever be a geek. I have my doctorate. I'm a research scientist and psychologist at Columbia. I do research. It's called translational research is the broad title of it. I do research to directly help and impact people's lives and their well-being. And one of the things I wanted to do after I retired, try and do research with NASA. Anybody think NASA's cool? Well, I do, so that's why but also there was a purpose to it. Again, I wanted to look at among different things. How do they take care of the men and women that are astronauts? And again, I'll use the example, if you want to connect dots, let's just talk about police, but it could be others. First with astronauts, how do they protect and take care of astronauts pre-mission, during mission, post-mission? In policing, recruit, career, retirement. And as I give a great shout out to Dr. Jen Fogarty, and there's many others at NASA and the people that work with them and contract workers, this line, take this one, if you can remember it. They want their astronauts to not just survive, they want them thriving in life. That's a word I've learned to embrace over these past couple of years for myself and trying to help others. But ultimately, whether you're an astronaut, are there any astronauts in the room? In Facebook world, somebody let me know. No, odds are we're not. But again, regardless of who you are, something that binds all of us together, we got to remind ourselves we're humans. And again, you look at it whether you're a first responder or not, or a parent, or you think whatever great role you're playing in life right now. And again, with NASA, they would say, astronauts, and how about, let me just say, because I know there's some in the room, police, fire, other first responders, military, you're not superhumans. None of us are. We're humans that happen to be doing superhuman work. But at the end of the day, we're allowed to have feelings. And that's one of the great things that I learned trying to combine the science with the practice and the interventions, especially first responders. Think about how radical this might sound. Or maybe it doesn't sound radical to you at all. Telling a firefighter or a police officer, validating whatever it is they said that they were experiencing. And saying, it's okay to have feelings. And Beth Ann, how you had said it too, it's okay to not be okay. But then we got to remind ourselves, let's make sure it's not just a cliche. Because when we tell people check in on somebody, well, check in on somebody, but when you ask them, don't be playing on your phone. Or I say, hey, how you doing? Go, okay, and then you walk away. Well, no, I'm not doing good, but how about also this, another takeaway that I hope you get. When I'm asking you to check in on somebody, and that's your non-homework assignment, because I'm not following up with any of you. When I ask you to check in with somebody, who should be the first person you check in on? Yourself. It's not selfish, it's smart. Everybody deserves to have positive mental health, no matter who you are. And I love that line on one of the slides before I came up here. I think it's the current campaign that for all seasons. It said, no matter you matter, or no matter who you are, you matter. Think about that. Especially in my work in mental health and helping people in really bad moments of their lives. There's a lot of people out there probably judging them. And from the great training and great people I've worked with, working on not judging people. I know others probably are. Also, I'll say there's a bit of selfishness to that. I learned the more I stopped judging other people, damn, that felt pretty good for me. Freed up a lot of space in here and in here, and it felt pretty damn good. And you know what? It gave me a lot more time to think about other things. How to look after myself, how to better help people. So if we're talking about, if we're in the human being business, next slide, please. Ultimately, what I'm here to do is talk about a message. It's a message of hope. Not pie-in-the-sky BS, rainbows, butterflies, and unicorns. This is an awful world. And I've experienced awfulness firsthand, directly and indirectly. But everything's not awful. Because if you only see things through that lens, the world is going to look really awful, and that creates some awful thoughts and awful feelings. But I'm not going to be some idiot that stands up here and say it doesn't exist. It does exist. In many of our lines of work, we've signed up to experience that nearly on a daily basis. So if that exists, what do we need to do? Figure out ways to handle it. If we acknowledge the bad in the world, what else do we need to acknowledge? Good. I was going to stand here like this for a long time unless someone said it. Facebook world, I had about 20, let's just say 300 people say the good. Thank you. Thank you. Hope. Don't forget about that. What a powerful, powerful word. Hope. And the best way to try and instill it in somebody else is to make sure you have it. Because especially if somebody's struggling right now, you have to have something hopeful to look forward to. That's realistic. It helps you get through the bad in the moment, knowing something good is coming. And another tip that I'll share with all of you too, learned from the science, you don't tell people what they have good going on in their life, what to be thankful for, what to look forward to. Because think about it, sometimes that's actually the stuff that's causing them grief and stress. What I'm in the business of, and it might be on a slide, now I'm forgetting what's on some of my slides, Beth. It's the bright lights. Narratives. Actually, I think it is the next slide. Narratives. Was it already up? Did you guys say? It came perfect timing. Thank you, Kelsey, or whoever it was. Yeah, so if there's my approach to those three levels, preventative, proactive outreach, crisis, and then suicide prevention. Again, the main topic here, it's all about narratives. I love metaphors. Anyone like metaphors? Just raise your hand even if you don't, because you know that's where I'm going with it. Thank you. This is us building rapport with each other. Narratives, 2 examples, I will say, and I'll ask anybody if anyone feels like shouting out the answer. Who's writing your life story? You are. You're the author of your life story. Of all the roles I have in life, I think one of the best titles I have is guide. I get to be a guide for people at different points in their life. So if you're the author, sometimes I get to help out and be the co-author for a chapter here and there. But you're the author of your life story. So the real question is not who is. The real question becomes, what story are you writing? What story are you writing? There are chapters still to be written. And when you need help, people like myself, more so professional help from like For All Seasons and others in this room as well. But now with the hammer, in case anybody's wondering, Jeff, there's a hammer there too. I'm about to explain it. Dramatic pause. I love this metaphor with the hammer. I read a version of it somewhere else. I slightly modified it. A hammer. Every one of us carries around a hammer when we talk about our narratives. A hammer could be used 2 different ways. 1, destroying everything in your own life and everybody else's life around you, making everybody miserable. Or 2, how else can you use a hammer? Build. Build as best as you can. Given your current circumstances, have hope to build towards a better future for yourself. And the best way to build that is starting today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, the stories we tell and create. The stories we tell create our reality. It can shape how you recall the past. You can't change the past, but you can change how you recall it, how you live in the moment, and then contribute to the future that you want. And again, you're the author. Thank you. Next. Ultimately, we're here to talk about suicide, and I want to make sure that we understand some facts behind suicide and also try and dispel some myths. Thank you. Two important words. Before I talk about these two words, let me dispel probably one of the most important myths connected to suicide. There's no single cause to suicide. We like things to be simplified often in our life. Suicide's not one of them. It's very, very complicated. The example that I try to provide is in police, and again, using it as an example, and I'll use the male pronoun. I'll hear people say all the time, the reason he killed himself is because his wife left him. I say, well, hold on a second. If that's the case, wouldn't we have hundreds or thousands of dead police every year due to seemingly the high divorce and separation rate? No, so he didn't do that. Or he didn't kill himself solely because of his relationship breakup. Now, could that have been part of it? Absolutely, but it's not the sole reason. This is where, again, the value of scientific protocols like the psychoautopsy and other investigative procedures come into play, because the metaphor I use for that, there's a puzzle. We want to put together as many pieces as we can. As many pieces as we can, gathering as much information as we can. And the way we gather all that information primarily is through interviews of people. And whether you know it or not, let me remind you or tell you for the first time, a high risk factor for suicide is being directly impacted by suicide. So that means when we do these investigations and we talk to people, we got to make sure we're asking the right questions, but in the right way. And making sure that we're not putting somebody in a worse spot than they already were. The number one reason people find value in participating in these psychoautopsies, these interviews, is one, because they said like they felt the interview was helpful for them to talk about their loved one. And two, they know that they're helping contribute to try and prevent it happening to another person, another family. And that reminds me, in crises, people feel like they have none of what over their life. Control. This helps people on their process of healing. It can. Hopelessness and helplessness. Two very, very important words when we talk about suicide. Now, they sound the same, but they're different. How are they different? Let me first talk about the similarities between the two. Hopelessness. And by the way, when I cover a couple of these key terms, even though it's backed by science and data, nothing's 100%. So you'll hear me maybe use the term in many and a lot or the majority. It's not everyone. Because very well someone in this room impacted by suicide might say that wasn't the case for me. So I'm not being disrespectful in saying it's every case. Often or frequently, a suicidal person is experiencing hopelessness and helplessness. Hopeless, they feel like things will never get better. They feel like things will never get better. Helplessness, not a person on this planet understands what I'm going through, nor will they ever. If you combine those two together, I don't know how you would describe that. But I think it's just really, really sad. And someone that's hurting in a really, really dark place. So with the mindset of hopelessness and helplessness, if we could go to the next one. There's a term, this is a bit of an older term. Some people don't use it anymore. I feel like it still applies. Psychache, unbearable pain and suffering. Now, it very well could be physical, but what I'm referring to right now at the moment is psychological pain and suffering. The hopelessness and helplessness is becoming too much. The pain, the suffering, they want it to end. They want it to end. Now, if we go to the next slide, what happens is, and this is where I think it's really important with empathy, trying to understand this. If you've never had suicidal thoughts in the room, it's really hard to understand suicide, which I think is fair. It's a fair thing to say. Because I think, though, we can all relate, no matter who we are as grown adults, we've felt versions of hopelessness and helplessness in our lives, right? Think about maybe you had divorce from hell and you couldn't get another job and you're waiting and nobody's doing anything. What happens is the suicidal mind, as much as it's the same there, it goes off on a different trajectory. Because if you've ever been in a bad spot, had your heart broken and you feel like your life is awful, okay, there's the empathy. But what happens is for the suicidal person, the hopelessness, the helplessness, the overwhelming psychological pain and suffering, then all of a sudden when the suicidal mind thinks, okay, there's only one way out, taking my life. That's where I think it's fair for people to say, wait a minute, how did you go from this to something so drastic? Well, I'm trying to explain this is what can happen. Next. If there's anybody, and I'm not asking anybody to raise their hand, I'm just saying this rhetorically, if anybody's been impacted by suicide directly, whether work, personal life, a combination of the two, I hope this slide, more so than maybe any of the others, you find helpful to maybe understand just a little bit more. I think it's fair for someone to say if they've been impacted by suicide, how could so-and-so do this? How can they do this? How can they leave their family, a beautiful spouse, young children? They knew all the services that were available. If that's how somebody feels, I'm not going to tell them don't feel that way. But if anyone feels that way at this moment or at any point in their life, hopefully this will help give you a bit more clarity. Often the suicidal person feels the exact opposite. As absurd as that might seem to you in the narrative that you see, their narrative is much, much different. Unfortunately, much darker. They actually feel like they're a burden to everybody. They feel like their spouse would be better off without them. Same thing about their children, their coworkers, their friends and neighbors. That's why this is so important to understand. And again, let me remind you, we can't change the past, but we can use this information today and going forward to help reduce the suffering of people out there, to help us maybe understand ourselves a little bit more. Remind ourselves of our shared humanity, no matter who we are. And let me say the other thing, aside of just suicide, it's okay to have differences. It's okay to have differences and not agree with people. And I'm not preaching, but I'm just trying to say how I feel. Like, I'll say it one more time. It's okay. And I was saying this to somebody out there too, with a lot of the work I continue to do in consulting and training, but also directly involved firsthand. Protests, demonstrations, and especially reminding first responders, but not to them because they're humans like everyone else here. It's okay if someone sees the world differently than me. And it comes back to me in the non-judging. And let me just say, it's not on a slide here. This one's important, and I'll have to say this twice to make sure it's not misunderstood. Data shows not all, but many suicides, there's an underlying mental health condition. Whether diagnosed or not, whether in treatment or not. And within the mental health conditions, the primary one is depression. Let me be very clear. It doesn't mean the majority of people that have depression kill themselves or take their lives. That's not what it means. But as the great Dr. John Mann that I work under at Columbia University, he always says, but if there's knowledge we can take from that, how about we make sure we understand depression? Because it's then not just about suicide prevention, it's also just helping people that are suffering from depression. So it's important to understand one thing, as I was just saying about it's okay to have different opinions and values. With depression, sometimes it's rigid thinking, which is very unhealthy. Having rigid thinking, I'm right, you're wrong. We're right, they're wrong. That's not healthy. And I'm not here to diagnose anybody. I can't. I'm not that kind of doctor. Anyway, but it's that idea of, a question I ask, well, how do you feel? And if you don't like it, and if you don't like the way it feels, I always say, well, you know what? The best part about that is if you're creating that in yourself, you're the one that gets to relieve yourself of that burden. And here's the other kicker about it. Real strength, real resilience is also acknowledging if it's really heavy, you don't have to figure it out by yourself. That's what professionals are for. And when we talk about fighting the stigma in first responders, military, and in life in general, how about we acknowledge that's what real resilience is too? Reaching out for help when you need it. And stop being jerks to each other and belittling people if they are in therapy. And when we talk about fighting stigma, how are we making sure we practice what we preach? Because no amount of positive thinking is supposed to replace positive action. The thinking is supposed to lead to the action. If there's one thing I've noticed a lot, anecdotally at least, with first responders, we've done a lot of great work, I think, reaching out to each other and checking in with each other. And again, I think a great example is that the peer support work we'll be doing next month here in the county. I think one of the areas we really need to make a lot of inroads, more so on though, is still for those first responders, using that audience as an example of checking in for yourself. People are more willing to check in with their coworkers the guy they ride around in the patrol car with, or in the rig, or in the ambulance, but still not checking in with themselves. And that just tells me there's a lot more work to do. Perspective. Perspective shapes reality. Thank you. Next one. Something that's very worrying, and again, I bring up a lot the context of first responders, but not limited to that, is the idea of impulsivity. And some of the great work done by Dr. Jill Harkavy-Friedman and others with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, another great group that I work with, largest funders in the world in suicide research. And I do a lot of work with them. They're fantastic people. I like to surround myself with fantastic people, if you haven't figured that out. And Dr. Jill, she has a great video where she describes the idea of impulsivity. Somebody might have suicidal thoughts for an extended time, but when somebody puts it finally in their head that they want to act on it, it could be impulsive, meaning they'll act really, really quick on it. And this is where I say, especially in policing, that's really, really dangerous. Why? Easy access. Well, I'm lefty. Easy access to firearms. There's no other way I can say it. It's pretty hard to prevent or stop it from somebody making a quick movement to their firearm. And this is my reminder why so much work has to be done at those other stages, especially the preventative, proactive work, helping people manage on a daily basis to try to prevent getting in that moment, but then also reducing the stigma. Or here's sometimes people will ask me during the Q&A, so if this was your question, I'm answering it before you get a chance. Someone will say, all right, well, let's just use police as an example. If someone is suicidal and they reach out for help, aren't they going to have to get their firearm taken away? And my answer is yes, absolutely. If someone's actively suicidal, they can't have their gun. And they'll say, oh, well, isn't that actually going to make things worse? Because if they work, they won't be able to work overtime. And if one of their life stresses are paying their bills, my answer to that is yes, you're right. This might add another stressor on top of the stresses they already have, and that's good. And they'll look at me like, what? That's a good thing. Why? They're still alive. We got to prioritize things. Step one, stay alive. Stay alive. And then what I said before, you don't have to take on things by yourself or alone. We've got financial people that can help try and put things back in order. And whatever else it might be. But you can't do any of that if the person's not alive. So maybe it gets a little bit worse in one sense, but I don't even call it gets worse. It's better. They're alive, they're breathing, and they're at great facilities, getting great top-notch help. Perspective. And then sometimes people that will reach out to them will help in those cases. While they're going through it initially, they might send some really mean, awful messages saying, you ruined my life, my career is over. And what happens, we find out most cases in that their career is not over. Just a little pivot on the road. Or how about the road's not finished? They get to rebuild it. How about here's another way? And again, first responders, but speaking to the wider audience as well, how do we fight stigma? Maybe we have to acknowledge maybe that person can never get their firearm back. Because people say, oh, well, if they get help, how many guys or women get their guns back? I'd say most of them do. Oh, not all of them? No, maybe some shouldn't, which is okay. There's plenty of other ways to live a noble life and in service to others aside of being a first responder, and there's nothing wrong with that, and we need to acknowledge that and make it acceptable, because otherwise it's still in the shadow of stigma, and it's not helpful. Thank you. So let's get rid of another myth. Sometimes people will tell me, oh, Jeff, that person's not really suicidal, it's just a what? Yeah, guess what it is? It's a call for help. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. Now, this is not data. I'm just making up the number. But let's just say there's a term called, ambivalence. So let's just roll with that for a moment. In terms of suicidality, let's just say 98% of that person wants to die. If 98% of them wants to die, and that's why they're on that rooftop or that bridge, that also tells me what? 2% what? It's trying to figure out why the hell shouldn't I do it? And that's where I've lived a fortunate life working with brothers and sisters that get to give what to that person? Hope from brilliant training and learning from others in the mental health and medical fields as well. That's what I call hope. At 2%, I'll take it. And what is it? A bona fide call for help. And we get to remind them, you matter. Your life is worth living. And simple, and this is where I'd say I've got years, decades of training in this. But this is where I remind people, and again, spoiler alert for anyone if you're in the room coming to the training next month, I usually wait to day 2 to say it. This isn't police training when they come to peer support training. Or this, whoever you are, if you're an accountant, this isn't accountant training or a bank teller or whatever. This is human being training. This is the stuff you need to bring home. We've got people struggling in our personal lives. Be the person that actually cares, but you don't have to fix it either. You don't have to fix it. I've learned from my experience in peer support, we talk about 4 levels of engagement with people when we're trying to help somebody in crisis. Whether they're suicidal or not, it's ask. Actually check in with somebody. Ask them, how you doing? Listen. And the opposite of listening is what? Oh, did I lose you all? Speaking. Come on, people. Talking. Yeah. The best way to help somebody is not talking. And I always say when people want to be a negotiator or peer support or similar help type role, people give me sometimes the wrong answer why they think they'll be good at it. And they'll say 2 things. I'm a really good talker. Thank you for laughing. You guys can come to the next training. You passed the first question. Or they'll say, and think about this one, and this is a hard gut punch to some people. They'll tell me, oh, I'll be really good at this because people come to me with their problems all the time. I'm a great fixer. Yeah, oh, thank you. This is a good group. Think about that. I said, who the hell put that burden on you? To think you've got to fix everybody's problems. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Listen to people, non-judging. Because who knows how to best address their life problems? That person, not you. Even if you think you've got the obvious answer, this is where the training skills come in. Help them figure it out. I'm also saying you're not just sitting there like a log and just nodding your head every 6 seconds following this story. There's certain skills that you can do to jointly co-author that chapter. But yet again, if you put that burden on yourself thinking you have to fix it, there's only one person that relieves that, you. And if you've been doing it for a long time, it takes a little work and effort to undo it. But that's my plea to everybody out here. Stop thinking, and think about the pressure you're putting on yourself. That's unneeded stress on you. A new sense of freedom, hopefully, for some people maybe in this room. Thank you. So, this is another big one. So, there's no such thing as the call for help. It is serious. And this is where I'd say again, if you want to talk about warning signs of suicide, I personally think one of the biggest red flags of somebody making suicidal statements. Saying, I don't want to live. I can't take this anymore. I want to die. You have to check in with that person, which I'll explain a little bit more, on each of those. But before I go back to that, let's talk about this one. Because this is, again, if there's another key takeaway, let this be, well, I don't know what number we're up to. If you ask somebody about suicide, you are not going to what? I've said that before in front of audiences, and next somebody will be like, oh yeah, right, you don't ask. I said, that's not what I just said the opposite. Let's rewind the tape, and I know this is live. So to be very clear, and I know I've got my New York accent here in Maryland apparently, 4 people told me on the way in, I didn't ask them, but they told me, you've got an accent. I still think the Queens one isn't as bad as Brooklyn, but we could talk later. I'm from Queens, if you didn't figure that out. You're not going to plant the idea. You're not going to plant the idea in somebody's head. From my life experiences, I was a crisis counselor for multiple years with Crisis Text Line. And another shout out to them, another great group. They're not paying me. I was one of the great volunteers with them. Excellent, excellent training I got from them. But it's that mindset of you don't plant the idea by asking them. My experiences, especially asking many strangers, when I was doing work with Crisis Text Line, asking on average probably a month 12 different strangers, I've learned if someone's feeling suicidal and if you ask them, odds are, what will they say back? No, the opposite. They'll say yes. They will say, yes, I am. This is where that ambivalence comes back. The 98.2%, they reached out, trying to figure out, why should I still be alive? And I was one of the fortunate people on the receiving end. By the way, God bless those people that do that. The 988, the helpline, the text line. Think about that. If you ask somebody, you're not planting the seed. Odds are they will tell you if they are. You're not planting that idea. So why do people not ask? They're afraid. First, they're afraid to ask, and then they're more afraid of what the answer is. I was like, what if they say yes? And I've always said, here's my tip. If they say yes, instead of going to your next question, which you got to ask more questions, how about remember who you are and who they are? A human being. And I remind myself and others when I do ask, and if they say yes, the next thing I usually say is thank you. And what do you mean by that? Thank you for being honest and trusting me and sharing that with me. And I want to remind you I care about you. And then I'll follow through with what else I need to ask that person. Next slide, please. So what do you do? What do I mean by that? You're like, well, what do you mean? What do you do if you're not sure if someone's suicidal? There's only one answer to that question. And again, I'll repeat it. What do you do if you're not sure if someone's suicidal? Ask. Next slide, in case that didn't go well. Yeah. Look how big I made that. Till. I changed the color, till, to emphasize that. Yeah, you have to ask. And as I was saying before, the call for help, it's not always direct. It's not somebody going to say right away, oh, I don't want to live, I want to kill myself. Sometimes it's indirect statements. I just don't want to be here anymore. I can't take this. I see no way out. I want to go to sleep and never wake up. Now, does that mean the person's suicidal? I don't know. I'm not sure. But I know that's really worrying for me. So how do I have to find out? I have to ask that person. And I'm not going to go through all the steps because that's not what today is for. But how about let me implore to all of you, look it up. Get trained in this. It's not long training. Here's the thing. Even if you're not comfortable, that's okay. Because it's not for everybody to do that. But if you're not certain, find somebody that can do it. Don't wait. It's better to have somebody say to you, and I'm not trying to make light of this, although it might come across as funny. If you ask, you get trained, you check in on somebody, and they say, oh, what'd you get, like a 2-hour wonder training from a really great trainer? And now you're a suicide expert on this? No, I'm not thinking of killing myself. Okay. What's the most normal thing to say back to that person? It's happened to me. I'd say, okay, first of all, thank you for being honest. Think about it if you were. And I didn't ask you. You're my best friend. You're my coworker, my neighbor. I wouldn't want you going on or having suicidal thoughts and never asking you. That's why I asked you. Why? Because I care. And that's the idea behind this care. Be that person that cares for people. Because there's enough people out there that don't. I can't change them. You can control yourself and only what you can do. And then by getting trained in this stuff, just be more aware. If that is like truly the biggest takeaway when it comes to suicide, there's a lot of people out there that just don't understand it. Why? Because suicide's really complex. And I get that. I do. And I know there's a lot of really busy people. We're all very, very busy. Excuse me, we have to prioritize. And I just ask you, try to prioritize understanding because, again, it's not just about suicide prevention either. But that is the worst of the worst. We want people living. And getting that simple, I call it simple because it's not long training, but it's intense, but it's supposed to be. And people would say, oh, well, also, they don't want to ask because it's uncomfortable. And I was saying this to somebody earlier. In a certain sense, doing peer support is a little bit tougher than hostage negotiation. And I don't want any negotiators yelling at me, what am I talking about? I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. I said in certain ways, not in every way. But in certain ways, because you think about it, if you're a hostage negotiator, you're talking to a stranger. And I'm not minimizing that. You're talking to a stranger. And peer support rules or in your personal lives, if you're checking in on somebody you know, you see them every day. In American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, actually, I thought they have these great learning video series called Seize the Awkward. What are they talking? It's awkward. Let's call that for what it is. Or I call it, and I don't have videos, but if I did my series, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's the only way. Practice. Ask. Go with a friend. Better yet, go with 3 friends. And then just practice. Maybe once every other week or whenever. Say, hey, I hope I never have to ask anyone. Or actually, the way I look at it, I hope I do, because I might recognize somebody struggling and I want to be the one to ask. Or if somebody says, hey, Jeff, I don't feel comfortable asking so-and-so, I don't know what to do. And what do I tell them? You just did something. You came to me. Thank you. Because that person's in crisis now too, worrying and struggling. Next slide, please. All right, so I look at this. There's a continuum here. And what we've talked about is the main topic on this far left, suicide. And here's the thing, if I did air quotes, which I guess I will, it's not just about suicide. Suicide's the worst of the worst. How about I don't want people living a fraction of their lives? Here's the thing that I always use in policing as an example. Man or woman dedicates their whole freaking adult life to service of others. One of the things we love, which I'm already collecting now that I'm retired, are pensions. We busted our ass for these. I want first responders, but anybody in this room, you've worked your whole life, you're collecting a pension. I want you to collect it for a really long time. And how awful it is, though people don't take care of themselves, they live a fraction of their lives. That's the stuff that's killing you. You're not going to be able to enjoy your pension. There's data, it's not that solid, but some of the different studies show, on average-ish, police officers die within about 5 to 7 years of retiring. And if you know a police officer or a first responder, or that's you, that's meant to scare you not into inaction but action. What are you doing? Look after yourself. Nobody said it was easy. No easy memos being passed out, but it's only as hard as you make it too. And stop thinking big, grand. Think smaller. As I know some of the people in here are familiar with some of my work in awe. If I didn't have an accent, I do right now. Some of you are like, what the hell did he just say? Awe. There's no other way to say it. There's no slide to show it up there either. So I got it. A-W-E, awe. I built up enough trust. Did anybody not understand what I was saying in the room? No one said? All right. Cool. Thank you. It's a good group. Thank you, Beth. Awe is a great one example of many resilience practices. Awe isn't just those once-in-a-lifetime experiences, but it's about looking at the everyday differently. Looking at the everyday differently because we're talking about not just surviving, not just getting through crises, trying to create, next slide, please, more times than not, thriving in life. I'm in the business of helping people build their upward spirals. Awe is one great example of that. Thinking about an awe moment of your life, a grand one, but also think about an ordinary moment that you might have recently. And for me, first one that always comes to my mind, as I know Beth Ann, you'll laugh or smile at this because you know me well enough, drinking a good cup of coffee. And I don't own stock in them, but I might as well give them a shout out too. Rise Up Coffee. And I'm sure there's other really good ones, yeah. So I don't want any hate email. What about, couldn't you say my place? Well, tell me what it is, and I'll say it next year or 2 years whenever I come back. Yeah, but here's my thing. And I'm going to wrap this up in a second because I know we want to open up some Q&A as well. If you want to wait, what the hell are you talking about now? Meaning coffee, yeah. I like to have a cup of coffee every morning. It reminds me I'm controlling what I can. The day might throw chaos at me, but I know I controlled the morning cup of coffee, and it helps set me up for an upward spiral. Now, I have no problem saying if you're sitting there still want to wait, I still don't get what the hell are you talking about. It works for me. That's my point. Find the little things in life. They truly are there. It doesn't make the bad or awful disappear. It's that balance, man. I'm a work in progress, like many of you probably in this room too. And I'm not up here preaching anything. I'm just talking about one guy in my life experiences, on my life journey with other people. Some have ended awfully, some are still going. My chapter's not done, my book's not done. I've got a great new chapter, a great audience here with great friends that we're on a great path together. And it's this idea of, when we talk about writing your stories, here's the thing. The best way to inspire somebody else, next slide please, and to provide hope in others, I've learned this from experience and the research that I do as well, and research that I'm doing at the moment, is one of the best ways to write your own story to help yourself first. Again, not selfish, it's smart, but then when you write your story, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with others. That's the opposite of fixing. Letting somebody else know, hey, I'm not going to say it's the same as you, but I've been through some bad stuff in life. Here's some things that really helped me. And I will tell you one of the most important ones, surround yourself with right people. You can't control everybody around your circle, but you can control most of them. And the ones that are toxic, small doses if you can't get rid of them fully. But if there's one thing, as I say when I stand up here on my metaphorical stage of success, also I feel successful standing up here physically, but I'm talking about metaphorical. If there's one blessing I realize, damn the amount of great people in my life. And not all of them are still around anymore. But I've lived a really blessed life, and every success that I've had, I own, I'm responsible for, but not solely. There's been people helping me. And this is why I practice this and share it with you, because it helps remind me, if I have dark thoughts and tough times in my life, I don't travel alone. Neither do any of you. So I think I'll end it on that note to segue to the Q&A, but the last thing I will say on this part of it is remember hope. The best way to give it to others, have it here, work on it, cultivate it. It's okay to have a bad day. Maybe a couple days. When it becomes intense, that's where your personal resilience comes in. No one travels alone. We all travel together. So thank you, everyone.
Isn't he amazing? There's such a gift. You know, for everyone who works in any field that you work in, there are moments where you meet certain people and there's like a click. And I remember driving home with Lisa from the training where we had the pleasure of first being trained by Jeff. And the conversation was just around like, holy moly, like we just sat with someone who just frames so much of what we do. And some of what For All Seasons has been doing in these last 8 years with our No Matter What You Matter campaign, and I mean, let's face it, we've been around for almost 40 years, so it's been happening a lot longer than that. But one of the things that we talked about, Lisa and I in the car on the way home, was we started an Ask, Listen, Share campaign 6 years ago. And so when you hear Jeff's message, and I specifically didn't mention it before you talked because I really wanted the audience to hear it from you, but that's kind of what we sort of base our campaign in, is just the simple 3 steps of ask the question, stick around and listen, and then share the resources. And I'm just so grateful that this is a message that it's not just a small town, you know, Eastern Shore message. Like, this is from Dr. Jeff Thompson, who has trained over 50,000 officers. I know, that's why I didn't introduce you as doctor in the beginning. I know.
But I do like the sound of it.
Right,
so
the credit is given.
It, so, yeah.
Correct. But you know, these are the things and the moments where we really know that something special is happening in this community, and that something really important is happening when what we are putting out to our community, we then have you come in and it's the same premise. And what it really sort of leads me to ask is, like, how do you see this happening in other communities, and where are the moments where we can inspire people to really not just hear it for what it is tonight, but take it to that next step?
Yeah, so it's a heavy first question. So
I mean, I'm going to put you on the spot, my friend.
So here's my thought, and again, speaking from my heart and not knowing these questions beforehand, here are things that come to my mind right away. The first is, and I don't know if it came across, I hope it, I'm very passionate about this. Mm-hmm. I'm very passionate about it. Finding other passionate people. Yeah. Because otherwise, if you feel like you're the only one involved in this, it's the shortcut to burnout and cynicism. And it's nearly guaranteed to happen. So it's that idea of patience. And also coming to the realization, you don't dictate when and how sometimes. So it's that idea of finding people in the community and being the champion yourself, but also, like, none of this stuff really gets done without partnerships. And I think we're great examples, 2 of us, of many others. And honestly, I don't believe in luck. So that's one thing. And those of you that know me or that are watching, if you really want to get me worked up, start throwing the word. There is no luck. It's hard work. Yeah. It's perseverance, determination. And sometimes it takes a lot longer than you want. Yeah. And it works. More times than not, it works. So it's my key thing on that is surround yourself with like-minded people. More times than not, you'll find others. And just keep at it. Don't give up.
I love that. I love that so much. One of the things that you touched on in your talk was the idea that if you ask someone if they're suicidal, then you are putting that thought in their head. But I would love to dig in a little bit more, and I just am so curious about why you believe that myth is so hard to shake.
Oh, I thought you were going to first say, why do I believe that to be true? You can't
no.
Dr. Jill told me first,
Right.
and then others did. Yeah, all right, good.
We can start there.
Because isn't that, I'm trying to think, there's that acronym for fear, right? False evidence appearing real. It's being scared of being scared, which again, validate that, acknowledge it. Yes, it is scary. And if you don't know the science and the background behind it, you could think, oh, well, wait, I might actually make it worse. No, and that's the whole idea of one of the best ways to alleviate it is get educated. And truly the other thing too is like in a lot of my trainings, these are people trainings. These aren't laboratory research trainings, it's practice. It really, think about anyone else, if you ever played a sport in life, which I play pickleball, I don't even know why I'm saying that. I like pickleball. I do. Oh. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll have you to our tournament then.
Yeah. But it's truly, but with that, it's just sometimes take our word for it. You're not planting the idea, but also acknowledge it is going to be uncomfortable. But I always tell, what's the alternative? Right. And we can't have that. And if you can't do it, that's okay. Have somebody else do it that's trained in it and considered maybe getting training. But otherwise, it's perspective again. You got somebody to do it. That's still winning in my book. There's a role for everybody as well.
Yeah, and that's really the whole piece of this kind of be a lifeline. One of the topics that you touched on in your presentation was about what I would call the anonymous ones.
Okay.
The anonymous ones who are the leaders in the community, the leaders in the families, the leaders within our communities, whether it be first responders, the people whose job it really becomes to have it all together. And I wonder if you can sort of share out what message you think is really important for the people in our community who are either identifying as those anonymous ones or supporting the people who are the anonymous ones.
Yeah. So relating it first personally, people ask me, well, how do you do what you do? And I tell you, it's hard. It's really, really hard. Especially in my line of work, it doesn't always work out well. And that means somebody unfortunately passes away from one reason or another. But then taken away from me for what you said, and many of the people probably in this room, how about I acknowledge to each of you it's hard. And let's just call it for what it is. It's pretty hard. And some of you maybe got dealt a bad hand or you're playing a bad hand at the moment. And maybe it's just hopefully me releasing a little bit of the valve of saying it's really, really hard. But don't forget you got this far. And I love saying, you didn't get this far to just get this far. There's more to your story. And as much, let's just use the hypothetical, the single mother trying to make ends meet, 1, 2, 3 jobs, couple of kids, trying to put them through a good school. It's also about giving yourself grace. You deserve that. But then also, if you want to keep being a beautiful, wonderful mother, you got to look after yourself. And that's where it's a work in progress, but give yourself some grace as well. You deserve it. And I hope that message reaches somebody right now.
You know, I love the idea of the grace and sort of that self-care, and the word practice comes back to my mind as I'm hearing you talk. We do lots of programming around self-care for our community, and the understanding that that has to happen every day. It can't be something you save up for the weekend, right? I mean, because sometimes the weekend gets busier than the week. And those moments, and I know that sometimes there is, in the process when we are talking about suicide or when we're acknowledging that someone might not be doing well, that there might be, you know, you called it out so beautifully of, you know, it's just this call for help. It's not maybe, well, they're not really serious, you know. So I'm wondering, like, how do you talk about with folks overcoming that fear of overreacting when someone's mental health might be something that you're addressing, and you're worried if you overreact, it's going to push them out of where they already are into a deeper depression or into maybe a deeper state of a mental health crisis?
Yeah, so one of the things, and tell me if I'm answering that, I'm just there, is it's not just the person going through the crisis. It's pretty heavy on their inner circle and the next circle, and it's all different emotions than, and one of them, and again, develop anger and frustration. And how many times, unfortunately, when I'm helping people, not the direct person that was suicidal or what have you, they're in the hospital or whatever, and the family member just feeling a whole bowl of intense emotions and trying to help them work through it. But it's also understanding, especially when it comes to mental health conditions, it's not the same as a broken arm. And I get the metaphors when if you have a broken arm, you'd go get help. If you have depression, you should get help. I get that, but it's also not the same either, because you can't see depression like you see the broken arm. And it's also very complicated. Somebody very well could have a good day, weeks, months, but then there might be some bad days as well. And normalizing that that can happen, it's really, really hard for the person not experiencing it, but being close to their loved one. And there's no, if you look, there's no answer to that other than simply acknowledging that. And the way how you said, sometimes people, oh, what word you mentioned earlier, oh, self-care, I don't like that word. Okay, use a different word then. I don't, like, we can argue over so many things, which we're not, no politics tonight or anything, next door or go wherever. But it's like, okay, then don't call it self-care. Or people like, that's stupid, you're saying play pickleball. All right, then don't play pickleball. Like, what is it are you doing to help yourself? Even if you're the helper in those, or indirect ones. But to be clear, and I know it's a little bit off your question, so I'll just end with one more thing. You can't, and I like how, you can't bank it either. You can't say you went to the gym on August 2nd. Well, you can say it if you did. Yes. But the neuroscience behind this, because again, it's not just suicide prevention, it's living a healthy, it's the habits. So, and again, the biggest tip, don't go for a 4-hour walk once a month. Try to do a 10-minute walk, and whatever the hell the math is behind there, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm out. No.
Someone probably wrote it in the chat box.
Somebody's got it.
Yeah. Did I answer that?
You absolutely did. And, you know, I think that the sort of the human piece that we have continued to circle back to is that what works for one might not work for somebody else. And, you know, Lisa and I talk about this all the time, and my big joke is that Lisa might go for a 10-mile run. I want nothing to do with running 10 miles. I'll run 5, but the last 5 she's on her own. And so really the gift of being able to talk about this humanness of when it works for you and staying out of judgment if it's not something that works for you, but it works for somebody else.
Well, that's the whole idea of the non-fixer mode.
Right.
And I always think of the example I use a lot. It's like if somebody's going through a bad relationship breakup, it's all right, well, here's what you do. Delete their name, don't answer any of their calls, and we're going out tonight and we'll get you 4 new boyfriends and keep 2 of them. No, now some people are like, oh, that is the, no, don't do that.
Don't.
That's, if you're taking notes, cross that out. You should have written that. No, it's that idea of, it comes back to what I sort of said, and I think I looked at the 2 of you in the front when I said it. It was the idea of helping somebody, saying, here's what I've done to help me. Or I'll say, hey, in my role, here's some people that I've helped in the past that they said they found helpful. And having the friend to check in on them. Or maybe just get in the fresh air even if you didn't want it. Or here's 2 other things, right? Showering even though you don't want to. Simple thing. Or eating even though you haven't had an appetite for days. It's those little things to remind people. And I found that, by the way, pretty powerful, reminding people, because there's the empathy. If we've all been in a bad spot in one way or another, those are things that we just don't feel like doing, so we normalize it. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I do want to take an opportunity to open up questions to the audience here and both on Facebook. And so if there are folks who have questions, Lisa's got a microphone in the audience, and she'll be happy to bring the microphone around to you.
Oh, great. I don't need it. One question I have that you didn't mention, working as peer support, and if you work with others, it can be beneficial in helping you keep a balance if you listen to them and they listen to you. But the savior syndrome, as we sort of invented when we had a meeting, I find that happening after they've been doing this for a couple of years, and it's, you can't make them see it for some reason, and it's very detrimental. And, you know, what do you do to help them?
Well, so for clarity, and I know the mic wasn't on, she was talking about with peer support and the role of sometimes people feeling that sense of this savior syndrome. Are you talking about the peer support member feeling that? Yeah, and that's why it comes back to, I always emphasize, and again, not trying to be New Yorker in your face, but know your role. Know who you are. And that's why I'd say, embrace that term, you're a guide. You're helping, or the metaphor I use is, And let me know if you like this metaphor, because I use it a lot.
Okay, good.
Picture like hurricane tumultuous seas. And they're getting thrown around and it's dark. Who are we as the guide? The person coming on in their rowboat with a light.
Right.
And shining a light on a pathway. They still have to make the efforts and we'll help them, but it's still their journey. No more, no less, just a guide. A great guide nonetheless, but that's also where it comes in if it does end up being a bad result and not what we wanted. That's where you have to, if you're in this line of work, you need positive coping strategies, because otherwise it can be really, really bad, and then you're no help to others if you're not, which is okay too sometimes. It just means then you need help, and then you're practicing what you preach. So there's always a way to look at it, I think.
You know, it reminds me as you're answering that question, and you said this earlier, we've said it before, suicide is so incredibly complex. And one of the reasons that we continue to have these conversations is the complexity of the issue, that there are no simple answers.
Yeah, and to add to that too, because I'm thinking if this helps, because it all depends, everything, but using that, at what stage of their life they are. Because maybe how they are at 23 isn't how they are at 33. None of us are the same. I'm not 33, by the way. I'm a little bit older than that, but I don't know why I used that number. But it's that whole, why did you laugh?
Because I thought you were 34.
Thank you. No, but it's that idea too. That just adds to the complexity of giving, in that word, it's not really a New Yorker word, but with the work I do down in the South, it's that I give yourself grace. And one other thing that I hear a lot is people would say when I became a cop, right? And not just policing for others, oh, working in policing changes you. Well, working in anywhere changes you, because you change, you're not the same person. And it's okay if it's changed you in some ways for the bad. I always challenge, also how did it change you for the good? Yeah.
And that's really, you know, I love that analogy, because sometimes we forget to stay in the positive, and sometimes it's easier to navigate back to that negative. Are there other questions in the audience?
Yep, we have another one.
So you spoke a lot about checking in with yourself, and individuals that are in the know of healthy coping skills and just self-regulation, they understand that. But for community members or people that will come back and watch this recording, what does that practically look like when you say checking in with yourself?
Great question. So specifics, asking yourself literally, how am I feeling? And to be even more literal, labeling the emotions that you're experiencing, validating you're allowed to feel however you feel. The worst thing you can tell somebody is, well, don't feel that way, even yourself. And if somebody has, you know, overwhelming negative thoughts, the worst thing you can tell people is what? Because we might have heard it, stop thinking that. Yeah, well, no kidding. So then the tip for that is, the best way to stop it is replace it. Replace it with what? Positive habits. And this is where you literally, well, I don't have it, pretend I have my notebook here, and writing stuff down. What do I do to look after myself? And here's the thing, when I work with people, in that case, I'd say, what are some things that you can do to look after yourself after a busy day? And they tell me a couple of things, they're like, oh, but I do that already. Here's like the radical moment of thinking. The neuroscience behind that is, well, then do it again, but when you do it, remind yourself, you're not just going for a walk. I'm going for a walk to look after myself. And that's where the habit forming comes. We're not robots. It's sometimes doing this stuff, and I'm still amazed. 10 miles, Lisa? That's really impressive. I'm caught up on that. It's doing that, and Lisa, next time you do it, you don't have to do 10, it could be 5, that's fine. But it's that idea of telling, and I'm not trying to make, it's that idea of do the stuff that you're already doing, connect it to labeling it in your head purposefully, because, and I know some of the professionals in the room, your thoughts impact how you feel, that impacts what you do, and then it becomes cyclic. So remind your thoughts to remind, and I'm not saying every darn thing you do, oh, I'm doing this for my mental health, this is for, no, like, common sense applies. Try to do it. Yeah, hopefully that helps with the answer. But again, specifically, if you're like, I'm not really sure, what did he say? Make a list proactively. What are things that you can do? Because the great Dr. George Bonanno at Columbia as well, he talks about you have to have a toolbox of resiliency, self-care skills, because what works today in this context might not work in the other context. So have a variety.
And practice.
Yeah, and actually do it too.
Yes.
That's the other thing. If you write it, don't forget you actually have to do it. And I also generally, some of them, the benefit of doing it with other people. Because one of the most vital things, I talked a lot about hope, and I don't know if I said it enough today, social connections. Social connectedness is vital. That combats the hopelessness, helplessness of reminding yourself, yeah, you know what, someone actually does give a damn. People do care about me.
So we have a question online.
All right.
As a parent, I've wanted to talk to my child about depression, suicide, and other mental health topics, but I'm worried it's too scary of a topic. What's the right age to start having these conversations?
It's an excellent question, whoever asked that, and thank you, first of all, for whoever wrote it, for having the courage to put that in the chat box, because let me start off with what I just said, is acknowledging it's scary, especially for a parent when you're concerned about a child. That's really, really, really scary. And the idea of, if you're concerned, have the conversation. Find somewhere online, reach out to a therapist. If you have a friend or a friend of a friend, ask them what are some pointers. The best broad answer that I give is ask questions more than talking. Listen, let them know that you care without judgment. And it's the idea too, is sometimes the messenger is just as important as the message. So maybe it's also having somebody else talk to them, that they might feel more comfortable opening up. But just make sure, if you're having them talk to somebody else, that they're qualified. And I'm not talking about necessarily with the initials at the end of their name, but just some training as well. And that might be everything that I keep going back to. Just have some knowledge in this. I'm not telling you, you don't need a degree. You don't have to be a doctor. Simple training, and like there's great trainings, like there's assist training. I'm not sure who does that as well, but there's others that small training, big impact. And especially when it comes to our youth and our children and the stresses that they're dealing with that I didn't deal with growing up. And it's just with social media. It's that 24/7 cycle. We can help them. There is help, and check in with them is the biggest thing I'd say.
I want to add something into that. I think also knowing that if you're having a difficult time having the conversation, things like 988 exist. All of the mental health agencies in our area, Mitchell Behavioral Health, For All Seasons, Channel Marker, all of those places, if you call and say, I don't know how to have this conversation with my child, somebody's going to be able to help you talk it through. And so sometimes just being able to call 988 and say, I don't know how to do this, and having a crisis hotline responder say, let's practice. That's a tool and a tip that sometimes, if you don't have that right person in your circle, those things are available 24/7.
Yeah, and the resources too. Because I just say, when I was with Crisis Text Line, like these short little things that even I still use to this day, and it helps alleviate that scariness, and it helps build self-efficacy or believing in yourself. Because for whoever that was, you're a great parent, and how do I know that? Even though it's a stranger, you wrote that message. So what a great first step, or whatever, adding to the great steps they've already done.
Great.
So I have a question follow-up from what you had talked about, Jeff. I know there's a lot of people that I work with and that are in the community, and maybe even here today, who's someone they know has died by suicide. And I wonder, how do you talk with families? You said something about, when you're working with families after someone has died by suicide, how do you work with families to help them on their journey to healing?
So there's different ways. One, and again, the first answer that I have is what I don't do, but a great partner, AFSP, they have, I believe the term is healing circles, and they can connect, say, if a parent lost their child to suicide, they can connect them with another parent to be able to talk to them that have experienced it, to help guide them. And the other, it's just providing resources. And I kind of like with the question earlier too, knowing what my role is and what it's not. This is where I have no problem saying, I'm not a clinician. So sometimes it's that ask, listen, and the sharing, guiding them to maybe just for a couple weeks, months, who knows, to talk to a professional to help guide them in the grieving process. But it also, it just truly, and it sounds profound for how simple it sounds, because it really is, just listening to somebody and having a basic understanding of active listening skills, and just letting know somebody that you truly care really, really goes a long way for somebody, especially in those moments of grief, but also daily interactions. Yeah.
And I would imagine that also then translates over, whenever we talk about grief at the agency, we talk about the immediate grief, but then, and that's when like the community wraps around and everybody's there and supporting. And so I would also imagine that adding in that goes on, 6 months later, that person still needs to be checked in with and needs to know that support isn't there because lives get busy. And so where there's that massive amount of support in the direct aftermath of a suicide, that might fall off, and making sure that we're wrapping around community members ongoing. Yeah,
and it just, even with grief broadly, like everybody grieves differently. And I don't think we mentioned that enough. In general, as communities, like there is like getting rid of that myth of the 5 stages of grief. There's no truth to any of that. We grieve differently, and sometimes you're at a certain point and you might be at a different point, which is normal. And here's the thing that I say, my non-clinical abilities, the time when you have to be worried or concerned is if it interferes with your daily life functioning. That's where I'd say that maybe you need a professional teammate to help you out. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a good thing. I tell people, and I tell, keep your head up. That's what you should be prideful for. You need a little bit more help. And yeah.
We have another question online. How can I be supportive if my friend has expressed suicidal thoughts but is refusing professional help?
Wow, that's and I don't know if that's hypothetical or not, but I think it's finding as much clarity as you can to the suicidal intent. And when we teach peer support and other things, we talk about how important confidentiality is. It goes out the window if somebody's suicidal. And that's where you did such a great job that now you need to bring in somebody that's much more qualified than you. And being trained to ask those questions, because if the medical help comes or an ambulance, person might change their mind and say, I didn't say anything. You can pass along, well, hold on, here's what they said. And again, you can't unring that bell. And this is where you want to get that person help. And if it's better to be on the side of caution than not. If they didn't say they were and you're just worried and they won't talk to you, that's where then maybe you talk to somebody. And here's the thing, to remind people, 988 isn't just for the person in crisis. As you said, it's for the parent. That's where you can seek to them for guidance. As one example of many, like, hey, I'm concerned about my friend. I asked them, they didn't answer me. What do you suggest I do? And they can give you guidance too. But the last thing I want to recommend, and I don't want to recommend it at all, don't do it, is nothing. Some sort of action, and that actually helps you feel a little bit better about doing something. And you don't need to have the answer yourself either. That's why there's others out there. And like when you say, what was it, ask, listen, share, get those resources for yourself too in those moments to help navigate you, because much like they're not alone, you're not alone either trying to help them.
So as we wrap up tonight, I do just want to give you an opportunity to touch on a subject that I think impacts everybody here in the room. That, you know, we're sitting here as folks that work in the field, and sometimes we hear from community members who say, like, well, I don't have a degree. This is not my field. I don't know how to have a role in this. I don't even know that I have a place in this. What would you say to the community member that's here tonight or listening who is saying, I don't know how to have a role. I don't have that training. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, it's a fair question to be thinking if somebody is, and kind of how we both emphasized before, if suicide's complicated, then our approach to preventing it has to be equally complex and complicated. There's no one way to prevent it. So everything that you do, know that you're contributing to it. So it's not just the actions telling yourself what you're doing. Do something. And again, where to start? Start with yourself. It's a great first step. Start with yourself. Reach out, get resources from your great organization, AFSP, others, 988, go on their website. And just next time you're getting an awesome coffee in town from anywhere, while you're waiting online, maybe don't slide through Instagram for 10 minutes. Maybe just do it for 8 minutes. And then use 2 minutes to look up some resources. Be fair to yourself, too. This is a long journey in life. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others. That's the greatest message. Practice what we preach. It's a tough world out there. Spread some kindness to somebody, inwards, outwards, and it doesn't have to be that complicated.
I can't thank you enough for being here. Again, Dr. Jeff Thompson, and we are so grateful for you all being here tonight. I do, just as we wrap up this evening, I want to give a huge thank you to Care First, who's one of our presenting sponsors, and the Sipe Family Foundation for making tonight possible. So thank you again for being here.